A mother arrived dirty at her son's graduation, and what the young man said into the microphone left all the guests speechless. Before starting the video, say what time you are watching this video and where from. Maria's alarm buzzed before dawn, a piercing sound that marked the beginning of another grueling day. She turned it off quickly, not wanting to disturb her sleeping son, John. The modest apartment was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic outside. Maria stretched her weary body, her muscles aching from her shift at the diner the night before. For years, this routine had defined her life. After losing her husband to a sudden illness, Maria had been thrust into a world of uncertainty. With no extended family to lean on, she became both the breadwinner and emotional anchor for John. Her mornings were a whirlwind of activity, cooking a simple breakfast, packing John's school lunch, and preparing herself for another long day of work. Each step was accompanied by a silent prayer, "Let him have a better life than mine." Her dreams for John were the only thing that kept her going. She wanted him to rise above the poverty and hardships that had shackled her life. Despite her exhaustion, Maria's eyes lit up whenever she spoke about John's achievements. He was her pride, her beacon of hope. As the sun began to peek through the cracks in the curtains, John appeared in the small kitchen, rubbing his eyes. His school uniform, though slightly faded, was immaculately clean. Maria ensured that he never felt ashamed of their circumstances. "Good morning, Mama," he said, flashing her a sleepy smile. Maria kissed his forehead. "Good morning, my love. Breakfast is ready. Eat up so you can focus in school." John sat at the table, wolfing down his toast and eggs. He noticed the dark circles under his mother's eyes. "Mama, you didn't sleep again, did you?" Maria waved him off with a smile. "I'll rest when you graduate, my boy. Then I'll sleep for a week." Her laughter was light, but the underlying truth weighed heavily on John. He vowed to make her sacrifices worth it. The clock ticked closer to 7, and Maria grabbed her coat. "I'll see you tonight," she said, ruffling his hair. "Be careful at work, Mama," John replied, his voice tinged with concern. As Maria stepped outside into the brisk morning air, she clutched her bag tightly. Her heart swelled with a mixture of determination and love. No sacrifice was too great for John's future. Maria's strength wasn't just in her work ethic, it was in the way she inspired John to believe in himself. The love between mother and son was unshakable, forged in the fire of their shared struggles. John excelled in academics, his sharp mind a testament to his unyielding determination. He attended an elite private school on a scholarship, standing out not just for his intellect but also for his humility. Maria was his cheerleader, constantly reminding him of his worth. But John's life at school wasn't without challenges. From the moment he set foot on campus, he noticed the stark difference between himself and his peers. They arrived in luxury cars, wearing expensive clothes and accessories. John, with his second-hand backpack and mended shoes, felt like an outsider. He didn't let it show, though. Maria had taught him to carry himself with pride. "You don't need fancy things to prove your worth," she often said. "Your heart and mind will take you further than any brand name ever could." At school, John's focus on his studies set him apart. He spent hours in the library, soaking up knowledge and working on projects. Teachers often praised him, calling him a model student. But his brilliance didn't go unnoticed by everyone, and not all attention was kind. Despite his accolades, John struggled to make friends. The social divide between him and his classmates loomed large. His peers lived in gated communities, attended lavish parties, and spoke casually about vacations abroad. John couldn't relate, and they didn't bother to understand his world. The loneliness weighed on him, but he never let Maria see it. He knew how much she had sacrificed to get him there, and he didn't want her to worry. At home, he was her source of joy, regaling her with tales of school projects and his dreams of becoming an engineer. One evening, as Maria sewed a patch onto his school uniform, John sat beside her, sketching designs for a new invention he dreamed of building. "Mama," he said softly, "I'm going to make something one day that will change our lives. I'll make enough money so you never have to work another day." Maria looked up, her needle pausing mid-stitch. Tears glistened in her eyes as she cupped his face. "You already make my life brighter, my son. Just by being you." John smiled, but his resolve deepened. He would make her proud no matter the cost. John first noticed Marcus and Victor during his second month at the elite school. They were the kind of boys who seemed to command attention without trying, their laughter echoing in hallways as if they owned the place. Marcus, tall with perfectly styled hair, was the ringleader, while Victor, stockier and slightly less charismatic, played the part of loyal sidekick. To them, John was an anomaly, a scholarship student among heirs to fortunes. At first, their comments were subtle. "Nice bag," Marcus sneered one morning, pointing to John's well-worn backpack. "Vintage, right, suit?" Victor chuckled, adding, "Classic thrift store chic." John ignored them, keeping his head high. He had dealt with bullies before and knew better than to let their words affect him. Maria had always told him, "People who try to bring you down are already beneath you." But Marcus and Victor didn't stop. Over time, their remarks grew louder, bolder, and harder to ignore. One afternoon during lunch, John sat alone under a tree, poring over his physics textbook. Marcus and Victor sauntered over, their tray-laden entourage in tow. "Hey, genius," Marcus called out. "What's that?" "Your blueprint for a time machine to escape this place." The group laughed as Marcus snatched the book from John's hands. John rose to his feet, trying to remain calm. "Give it back," he said evenly. "Relax, it's just a book," Marcus replied, flipping through its pages. "Wow, look at all these notes. Nerd alert." Victor chimed in, "Bet he memorizes them at night while his mom irons other people's clothes." The mention of his mother stung, but John clenched his fists and bit back a retort. He knew engaging would only escalate things. "Keep it," John said quietly, turning to walk away. The group erupted in laughter, but as John walked off, his shoulders squared, Marcus's smirk faltered. There was something about John's quiet dignity that Marcus couldn't shake. Despite their bullying, John's resolve only grew stronger. He poured himself into his studies, determined to rise above their taunts. But the tension continued to build, and deep down, John knew it was only a matter of time before things came to a head. At home, John confided in Maria one evening, sharing only fragments of the day's events. She listened quietly, her hands pausing mid-chop as she prepared dinner. "Don't let them dim your light," she said firmly, her voice steady. "You're meant for greater things, John. They see it, and it scares them." John nodded, his mother's words settling into his heart. But as he drifted to sleep that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was brewing. As weeks turned into months, Marcus and Victor's taunts transformed from sharp-edged words into calculated actions. Their mission seemed clear, to remind John that he didn't belong. For them, it was a game, a cruel amusement fueled by the bubble of privilege they inhabited. One morning, John found his locker defaced. Scrawled across the door in bold, black marker were the words, "Charity case." Students passing by snickered or pretended not to notice. John's stomach churned, but he forced himself to remain calm. He cleaned the locker with a damp cloth, his hands trembling slightly as he scrubbed away the hateful words. During gym class, things took a more humiliating turn. Marcus accidentally tripped John on the basketball court, sending him sprawling onto the polished floor. "Oops," Marcus said with feigned innocence, extending a hand to help him up. "Guess you're not used to playing in real sneakers." Laughter echoed around the court. John ignored him, standing on his own and dusting himself off. His silence seemed to enrage Marcus even more. Victor chimed in, "Maybe he's saving his scholarship money for a pair." "What do you think, Marcus? Should we start a collection?" Marcus smirked. "Nah, wouldn't want to spoil him." Despite the ridicule, John refused to retaliate. He focused on his studies, knowing his success was the best response he could give. But their cruelty continued to escalate, and soon, Marcus and Victor set their sights beyond John. They targeted Maria. The final weeks before graduation were supposed to be a time of celebration. For John, it was a countdown to fulfilling his mother's dreams. For Marcus and Victor, it was one last opportunity to assert their dominance. Maria rarely ventured near John's school. She preferred to avoid the glances that reminded her she didn't fit into their world. But on this particular day, she was determined to surprise John with a small treat, a gesture of her pride in his upcoming milestone. Clad in her modest work uniform, which still bore stains from the morning shift, she arrived at the school gates carrying a neatly packed lunchbox. The sight of her immediately caught Marcus's attention. He and Victor, lounging near the parking lot, exchanged a smirk. "Is that his mom?" Marcus asked, loud enough for others to hear. "No wonder he's such a charity case." Victor laughed. "Look at her, straight out of a cleaning commercial." Maria, oblivious to the boys, waited patiently at the gate, clutching the lunchbox with a mix of nervousness and excitement. She spotted John across the courtyard and waved. Her son's face lit up momentarily before darkening as he noticed Marcus and Victor approaching her. Marcus sauntered over, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you lost? This isn't the service entrance." Maria blinked, confused. "I'm just here to see my son." Victor snickered. "You mean John? He talks about you all the time. You must be so proud, raising the school's favorite charity project." The sting of their words was immediate, but Maria straightened her spine. "I am proud," she said firmly, her voice unwavering. "My son has more heart and determination than you'll ever understand." Her composure only fueled their mockery. Marcus gestured exaggeratedly, as if touched by her words. "Wow, what a speech. I guess hard work really runs in the family." Before Maria could respond, John appeared, his fists clenched at his sides. "Leave her alone," he said, his voice low and fierce. Marcus chuckled. "Relax, genius. We're just making conversation." John stepped between his mother and the boys, his glare like fire. "Go make it somewhere else." For a moment, Marcus hesitated. Something about John's defiance was disarming. But Victor nudged him, and they turned away, laughing as they walked off. Maria placed a hand on John's shoulder, her voice soft. "Don't let them get to you, mi amor." John shook his head. "They don't deserve your kindness, Mama." As they walked home together, Maria felt a pang of worry. She had faced her share of hardships, but seeing John caught in the crossfire was a different kind of pain. Yet, despite the humiliation, she was determined to stand by him, no matter what. The encounter with Marcus and Victor left a heavy shadow over the days leading up to the graduation. Maria had always endured humiliation with grace, brushing off insults for the sake of John's future. But this time was different. The sting of their words wasn't just about her. It was about her son, her pride, her reason for everything. That night, as Maria sat by the sewing machine mending a tear in John's pants, her mind replayed the cruel taunts. She could see the pain in John's eyes as he shielded her from their venom. The thought of him carrying that burden broke her heart. "I'm not going," she murmured to herself. But John overheard her. He stood at the doorway, his face set with determination. "Mama, you have to come. This is our moment." Maria looked up startled. "Our moment? John, I don't want to ruin it for you." "What if they—" John interrupted, his voice firm. "They don't matter. What matters is that you're there. You've worked too hard to stay in the shadows. You've sacrificed everything for me. Please, Mama. I need you there." Tears welled in Maria's eyes. She nodded silently, pulling him into a hug. In her heart, she knew he was right. The morning of the graduation was brisk, the sky clear and blue. Maria wore her best dress, a simple, faded garment she had saved for special occasions. She had no jewelry, no makeup, but her pride in John radiated from her like sunlight. As she walked to the ceremony, she passed the pristine cars of other families pulling into the parking lot. Parents stepped out in polished attire, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Maria kept her head high, clutching her small handbag nervously. When she arrived at the venue, the stares began immediately. She could feel the weight of judgment in every glance, hear the whispers behind cupped hands. Marcus and Victor were among the crowd, smirking as they noticed her. "She actually came," Marcus whispered to Victor. "She's braver than I thought." Victor chuckled. "Or dumber." Maria ignored them, her eyes scanning the crowd until she spotted John on stage with his graduating class. He was beaming, his cap slightly askew. Her heart swelled with pride. As the ceremony began, Maria found a seat in the back, away from the families with cameras and bouquets. Her hands trembled in her lap, but she reminded herself why she was there. This was John's day, and no amount of ridicule could take that away. The principal's voice echoed across the auditorium as the ceremony reached its final moments. And now, it is my honor to introduce the valedictorian of this year's graduating class, John Hernandez. Applause rippled through the crowd, though some clapped hesitantly, their earlier judgments about John's background lingering. Maria's hands were clasped tightly together, her heart pounding with a mixture of pride and nervousness. She watched as John approached the podium, adjusting his microphone with practiced ease. "Good morning, everyone," John began, his voice steady and clear. "Today, I stand before you not just as a graduate, but as a testament to perseverance, resilience, and the unwavering power of love." The crowd quieted, intrigued by the depth in his tone. "Like many of you, I've had the privilege of receiving an education that has challenged me and prepared me for the future. But my journey here wasn't easy. It was paved by sacrifices made by someone who isn't sitting in the front row or holding a bouquet of flowers. She's sitting in the back, wearing her best dress, hoping not to be noticed." Murmurs spread through the audience as John turned his gaze to Maria. Her face flushed, and she lowered her head, wishing she could disappear. "My mother," John continued, his voice thick with emotion, "is the reason I'm standing here today. She's the reason I had the courage to dream of a better future. While others had tutors, she was my tutor. While others had wealth, she gave me something money can't buy, a belief in myself." The applause began hesitantly but grew louder, rippling through the auditorium like a wave. "She worked long hours, came home exhausted, and still found time to help me study. She sewed my clothes when they tore, packed my lunches with whatever we could afford, and reminded me every single day that I could achieve anything I set my mind to. And when people tried to make me feel small because of where I came from, her words lifted me up. You're worth more than their opinions." Tears streamed down Maria's face now, and she wasn't alone. In the audience, parents and students alike wiped their eyes, moved by John's tribute. Even the principal dabbed at his cheeks with a handkerchief. "I want everyone here to know that success isn't just about intelligence or talent. It's about the people who stand behind you, who believe in you even when the world doesn't. So today, this diploma is not just mine, it belongs to her." John raised his diploma high, and the crowd erupted in applause, rising to their feet. Maria hesitated for a moment, overwhelmed, before John stepped down from the stage and walked toward her. The applause began to die down as John returned to the podium. His face, once warm with emotion, now bore a steely resolve. "There's something else I need to address today," he said, his voice calm but laced with determination. "Because while this ceremony is about celebrating our achievements, it's also a moment to reflect on the values we carry with us into the future." The audience shifted uneasily, sensing a change in tone. Marcus and Victor, lounging near the center aisle, exchanged amused glances. "For the past year," John continued, "I've been reminded almost daily that I don't come from privilege, that I'm not like many of my classmates who have wealth and status behind them. And for some, my presence here wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an affront to their idea of who deserves to succeed." Whispers began spreading through the crowd. Marcus straightened in his seat, his smirk fading. "I've been mocked, humiliated, and made to feel like I didn't belong," John said, locking eyes with Marcus and Victor. "And more often than not, I stayed silent, not because I was weak, but because I believed my actions would speak louder than their words. But today, silence isn't an option." A hush fell over the auditorium. Maria's heart clenched as she realized where this was going, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. "To Marcus and Victor," John said, his voice ringing clear, "I want to thank you." The audience gasped. Marcus froze, confusion and dread flashing across his face. "You taught me resilience," John explained. You taught me how to endure cruelty with grace and how to rise above pettiness. But most importantly, you taught me that people like you don't define my worth. My mother does. My work does. My character does. The audience began murmuring, their eyes darting toward Marcus and Victor, who were now shifting uncomfortably in their seats. And to everyone here who has ever judged someone based on their appearance, their background, or their income, John continued, I urge you to reconsider. True strength isn't in tearing others down. It's in lifting them up. It's in recognizing the humanity in every person, regardless of where they come from. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus and Victor stared at the floor, their faces pale. John's gaze swept across the crowd. If we want to build a better world, it starts here. It starts with how we treat the people around us. So let's do better, not just for ourselves, but for the future we want to create. The audience erupted into applause, louder and more sustained than before. Some parents stood, clapping fervently, while others whispered to their children, visibly moved. As John stepped down from the podium, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had spoken his truth, and now the rest was up to them. As John stepped off the stage, the applause thundered in his ears. But it wasn't the applause he sought. It was Maria's face. She stood at the back of the auditorium, tears streaming down her cheeks, her hands pressed tightly together as though in prayer. Mama, John said softly as he approached her, his voice almost drowned by the clamor. Maria reached for him, pulling him into an embrace so fierce it was as if she was trying to shield him from the world. You didn't have to say all that, she whispered, her voice trembling. You didn't need to defend me. Yes, I did, John replied, pulling back to look into her tearful eyes. You've spent your whole life defending me. It was time someone defended you. Around them, a ripple of movement caught their attention. Parents, students, and faculty were turning toward Maria, their faces a mixture of awe and shame. A woman in a tailored suit approached, holding out her hand. You must be Maria, she said warmly. Your son's words were extraordinary. I don't think there's a single person here who wasn't moved. Maria hesitated before shaking the woman's hand, her usual self-consciousness battling with an unfamiliar surge of pride. Thank you, she managed, her voice barely audible. More people followed, offering congratulations and apologies, their earlier judgments melting away in the face of John's heartfelt tribute. The spotlight had shifted, and now it shone brightly on Maria, the mother who had endured so much for her son's dreams. Amid the crowd, Marcus and Victor remained frozen in their seats. The color had drained from Marcus's face, and Victor sat slouched, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Their usual air of confidence had been stripped away, leaving only guilt and discomfort in its place. When the ceremony concluded, Maria and John walked together toward the exit. The cool air outside felt like a balm after the intensity of the event. Maria clutched John's arm, her steps slow and deliberate. I'm so proud of you, she said finally, her voice filled with emotion. John smiled, placing his hand over hers. I learned it from you, Mama. They paused on the sidewalk, looking back at the school. It was no longer a place of judgment or struggle in their eyes. It was a symbol of triumph. In the days following the graduation, John's speech became the talk of the town. Video recordings circulated online, capturing the raw emotion and unflinching honesty of his words. Comments flooded social media, with many praising his courage, while others expressed outrage at the behavior of Marcus and Victor. The story quickly reached local news outlets, sparking widespread debate about privilege, bullying, and resilience. Amid the uproar, Maria received an unexpected visitor, a lawyer representing a local advocacy group that had seen the viral video. Mrs. Hernandez, the woman said, setting her briefcase on Maria's small kitchen table, we'd like to represent you in a defamation case against Marcus and Victor. Maria's eyes widened in disbelief. Defamation? She asked, glancing at John, who sat beside her. The lawyer nodded. Their behavior, mocking your work, publicly humiliating you, was not just cruel. It caused reputational harm and emotional distress. Holding them accountable could set an example and bring attention to the issue of systemic bullying in schools. Maria hesitated. The idea of standing up to such powerful families was daunting. But as she looked at John, she saw the same resolve in his eyes that had carried her through so many hardships. "We'll do it," she said quietly. The legal proceedings that followed were tense and grueling. Marcus and Victor's families, wealthy and influential, initially sought to dismiss the case as frivolous. But as evidence mounted, videos, testimonies from witnesses, and even confessions from classmates who had witnessed the bullying, the tide began to turn. In the courtroom, Maria was a picture of quiet strength. She testified about the pain of watching her son endure ridicule and the humiliation she had faced that day at the school gate. Her words were simple but powerful, resonating with everyone present. When it was John's turn to speak, he did so with the same eloquence and conviction that had stunned the graduation audience. "My mother taught me that we're defined not by what we have, but by how we treat others." Marcus and Victor forgot that lesson. "But I believe everyone can change if they're willing to learn." Marcus and Victor sat silently, their expressions a mix of regret and discomfort. The court ruled in Maria's favor, ordering Marcus and Victor to pay damages and issue public apologies. The verdict wasn't just a legal victory, it was a moral one. For Maria and John, it was a moment of vindication, proof that their voices mattered. The courtroom was packed on the day of the sentencing. The case had drawn significant attention, with reporters lining the hallway and curious onlookers filling the gallery. Maria sat quietly beside John, her hands folded in her lap. She felt a mixture of anxiety and relief. Anxiety about the final outcome and relief that the truth had been heard. The judge, a stern woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed the case summary one last time before addressing Marcus and Victor directly. "Marcus Williams and Victor Daniels," she began, her voice firm. "This court finds your actions toward John Hernandez and his mother, Maria Hernandez, to be reprehensible. Bullying, public humiliation, and the abuse of privilege are not trivial matters. They harm lives, perpetuate inequality, and corrode the very fabric of our society." Marcus stared at the floor, his once confident posture deflated. Victor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "Your behavior has had serious consequences," the judge continued. "You have not only hurt the Hernandez family, but also set a harmful example for your peers. It is the duty of this court to ensure that such actions are met with accountability." The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered the sentence. Both Marcus and Victor were ordered to complete 500 hours of community service, specifically working with underprivileged communities. They were also required to attend sensitivity training and issue public apologies to Maria and John. In addition, their families were to pay a substantial fine, which Maria had requested be donated to local charities that supported education and anti-bullying initiatives. As young men with bright futures, the judge concluded, "You have a choice. You can learn from this experience and become better individuals, or you can continue down a path of entitlement and disregard for others. The decision is yours." As the judge's gavel struck, signaling the end of the trial, a wave of emotion swept over Maria. She clutched John's hand, tears streaming down her face. Justice had been served, but what mattered most to her was the message this verdict sent. No one was above accountability, no matter how privileged. In the days that followed, the required public apologies were issued. Marcus and Victor appeared on local news, their faces pale as they read prepared statements expressing regret. "I want to apologize to John Hernandez and his mother, Maria Hernandez," Marcus said, his voice shaky. "Our actions were cruel, thoughtless, and inexcusable. I deeply regret the pain we caused." Victor echoed the sentiment, though his voice cracked with emotion halfway through. For the first time, their arrogance seemed to be replaced with genuine remorse. The public reaction was mixed. Some criticized the apologies as insincere, while others commended the legal system for holding the boys accountable. For Maria and John, it wasn't about public opinion, it was about closure. Community service began as a grueling chore for Marcus and Victor, a stark contrast to the life of luxury and ease they were accustomed to. Assigned to a local food pantry, They spent their days unloading heavy boxes of donations, serving meals to those in need, and cleaning the facility after hours. The work was exhausting, but the people they met began to shift their perspective in ways they hadn't anticipated. One morning, as Marcus stacked cans of soup on a shelf, an elderly woman approached him. Her clothes were worn, and her eyes carried a quiet sadness. "Thank you for helping today," she said softly, her hands trembling as she reached for a can. Marcus hesitated before handing her the item. "You're welcome," he replied, his voice unusually subdued. She smiled faintly. "It means more than you know. My grandson eats because of this place." Her words lingered in Marcus's mind long after she walked away. He had never considered what it might be like to rely on others for something as basic as food. For the first time, he began to understand the struggles of people like Maria and John, not as abstract concepts, but as real, human experiences. Victor's turning point came during a conversation with a teenage boy named Luis, who frequented the pantry with his siblings. As they worked together to sort donated clothes, Luis asked, "Why are you here?" Victor hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I made a mistake," he admitted. Luis nodded. "My mom always says mistakes can teach you, as long as you're willing to learn." The simplicity of the boy's wisdom struck Victor deeply. He thought about the hurt he had caused, not just to John and Maria, but to his own integrity. For the first time, he felt the weight of his actions beyond the legal consequences. They had been a betrayal of his own potential to be better. As the months passed, the work began to change Marcus and Victor. Their community service hours were no longer just a punishment. They became an education in humility and empathy. They started conversations with the people they served, learning their stories and finding common ground in unexpected places. The sensitivity training sessions also forced them to confront the biases they had carried for so long. Through guided exercises and group discussions, they began to see how their privilege had blinded them to the humanity of others. It wasn't easy. The process was messy, uncomfortable, and often filled with guilt. But it was necessary. One day, after completing their hours at the pantry, Marcus turned to Victor as they walked to the parking lot. "Do you ever wonder if we'll get a chance to make it right? Not just with the court or the public, but with them, Maria and John?" Victor nodded slowly.
"Yeah.
"And I think we owe it to them to try, even if they don't forgive us." Months had passed since the court ruling, and the weight of their actions lingered heavily on Marcus and Victor. The community service and sensitivity training had opened their eyes to a world they had previously ignored, but one final step remained. They needed to confront Maria and John. The thought filled them with dread. They had rehearsed their words countless times, yet nothing seemed sufficient. How could they possibly atone for the pain they had caused? Still, they knew that seeking forgiveness wasn't about their comfort, it was about taking responsibility. Maria was folding laundry in their small living room when there was a knock at the door. John, now busy with summer internships and preparing for college, looked up from his laptop. "Expecting anyone, Mama?" "No," Maria replied, frowning slightly as she approached the door. When she opened it, her breath caught. Marcus and Victor stood there, their expressions nervous but sincere. Marcus held a small bouquet of wildflowers, while Victor clutched a box of pastries. Both looked a far cry from the confident, mocking boys they had been. "Mrs. Hernandez," Marcus began, his voice shaky, We came to apologize." Maria's grip on the door tightened. For a moment, she considered closing it without a word. But something in their eyes, raw, unguarded, stopped her. She opened the door wider, stepping aside. "Come in," she said quietly. The boys entered, their movements hesitant, as if they didn't trust themselves to tread lightly enough. John appeared from the hallway, his expression hardening the moment he saw them. "What are you doing here?" he asked sharply. Victor set the pastries down on the table, his hands trembling. We wanted to talk to you. To both of you." John crossed his arms, his posture defensive. "Talk about what?" "You've already said plenty in the past." Marcus stepped forward, his voice faltering. "You're right. We have. And what we said, what we did, was wrong. We're not here to make excuses. We're here to tell you that we're sorry. Truly sorry." Victor nodded, his eyes downcast. We didn't understand back then. We thought it was just jokes, but it wasn't. It was cruel. And it took us a long time to realize how much we hurt you. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Maria studied the two boys, her heart torn between anger and compassion. She could see the sincerity in their eyes, but the scars of their actions were still fresh. Why now? John asked finally, his voice quiet but firm. Marcus took a deep breath. Because we've changed, or at least we're trying to, and because it's the right thing to do.
You didn't deserve what we did to you, John.
And Mrs. Hernandez, you didn't deserve to be treated like that either. Maria looked at John, her gaze searching his face. She could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. But she also saw the young man he had become, a man of strength, kindness, and integrity. After a long moment, she spoke. Forgiveness isn't something you ask for lightly, she said. It's something you earn. And it's not just about words, it's about actions. We know, Victor said, his voice barely above a whisper. And we'll keep proving it, no matter how long it takes. Maria's expression softened slightly. You've taken the first step. That counts for something. After Marcus and Victor left, the silence in the apartment was thick with unspoken words. Maria returned to her chair, folding the laundry with deliberate precision, though her hands trembled slightly. John remained standing, his arms crossed and his brow furrowed. You're not seriously thinking of forgiving them, are you, Mama? John asked finally, his voice sharp with disbelief. Maria paused, smoothing a shirt with her hands. Forgiveness isn't about them, mi amor. It's about us. It's about choosing peace over anger. John's expression hardened. But they don't deserve it. They humiliated you. They humiliated both of us. How can we just let that go? Maria looked up, her eyes soft but steady. I didn't say we'd let it go. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what they did. It means refusing to let their actions control us anymore. John sank into the couch, his head in his hands. I don't know if I can do that, he admitted. Maria moved to sit beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. You don't have to decide right now. Forgiveness takes time. It's a process, not a moment. The following days were a whirlwind of reflection and quiet conversations. Maria thought deeply about Marcus and Victor's apology. She replayed their words in her mind, searching for signs of insincerity, but finding none. It didn't erase the pain they had caused, but it planted a seed of hope that people could change if given the chance. For John, the decision was more complicated. He carried the weight of their actions in his heart, each taunt and humiliation etched deeply into his memory. But as he watched his mother go about her day with an air of newfound peace, he began to question his own anger. Was holding on to it helping him, or was it holding him back? A week later, Marcus and Victor returned, their faces still marked by apprehension. Maria greeted them at the door, her expression calm but serious. Come in, she said, gesturing toward the modest living room. The boys sat down, their postures stiff. John joined them reluctantly, his arms crossed as he leaned against the wall. Maria spoke first. I've thought a lot about what you said. And while forgiveness isn't easy, I believe in giving people a chance to grow. I forgive you both. Marcus exhaled a shaky breath, his eyes glistening. Thank you, he said quietly. You don't know how much that means. Maria turned to John. What you choose to do is up to you, mi amor. The room was silent as John wrestled with his emotions. Finally, he stepped forward, his gaze locking with Marcus and Victor's. I'm not there yet, he admitted. But I'm willing to try. Prove to me that you've changed. Victor nodded earnestly. We will. I promise. Forgiveness had been extended, but the journey toward reconciliation was just beginning. True to their word, Marcus and Victor worked to prove that their apologies were more than empty gestures. They returned to the food pantry where they had completed their community service, not because they were required to, but because they wanted to continue helping. At first, their presence was met with skepticism. The staff and volunteers, familiar with their history, were wary of their intentions. But Marcus and Victor didn't waver. They showed up consistently, rolling up their sleeves to unload trucks, sort donations, and serve meals. Slowly, their actions began to speak louder than their past. Maria watched these developments from afar, occasionally hearing updates from mutual acquaintances. Though she rarely spoke of it, she felt a quiet satisfaction knowing they were making an effort. John, however, was more cautious. His interactions with Marcus and Victor were polite but distant. He kept them at arm's length, unsure if he could ever truly let go of the hurt they had caused. One afternoon, while walking home from his internship, John spotted Marcus sitting on a bench near the local library. He hesitated, debating whether to approach, but curiosity got the better of him. "What are you doing here?" John asked, his tone neutral. Marcus looked up, startled, and then gestured to the notebook in his lap. "Writing. Trying to figure some things out." John raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "Like how to move forward. How to be better. I've been thinking a lot about what you said at graduation about strength being in lifting others up. I want to live up to that, but I don't know if I ever can." John studied him for a moment, his guarded expression softening slightly. "You don't have to figure it all out at once. Just keep trying." Months turned into a year, and gradual changes unfolded. Marcus and Victor became regulars at the pantry, organizing fundraisers to expand its reach. They even started speaking at local schools, sharing their story of transformation and warning against the dangers of entitlement and bullying. For John, college opened new doors. He thrived in his engineering program, earning scholarships and awards that further validated his hard work. Maria, now working fewer hours thanks to John's success, began taking evening classes to pursue a long-held dream of becoming a teacher. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maria and John sat on their small balcony, sipping tea. "You've come so far, mi amor," Maria said, her voice full of pride. John smiled. "We both have, Mama. Everything I've done, it's because of you." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a notification on John's phone. A message from Marcus appeared on the screen. "Thank you for everything. For holding us accountable. For giving us a chance." John read the message twice before setting the phone down. Turning to his mother, he said, "Maybe people really can change." Maria nodded, her gaze fixed on the fading light. "Yes, they can. But it takes courage to forgive, and even more to make amends." As the stars began to emerge, mother and son sat in companionable silence, knowing that the future was brighter not just for them, but for everyone who had chosen to grow. The story of Maria, John, Marcus, and Victor is a testament to the transformative power of accountability, forgiveness, and redemption. Through resilience and grace, Maria and John found their triumph, and Marcus and Victor learned the strength it takes to change.